Yeah, of course it is. Hey, welcome to the Alyosha Society, where we're pursuing, what are those three things? Truth, beauty, and goodness through great literature. Welcome back, everybody. So remember, we had our introductory video. Then we have done two videos on Edgar Allan Poe. This is the poetry unit number 3, and we're now going to our second poet, which means if you've done all 3 poetry units, this will be the 6th poet we've looked at. Well, I wonder who that poet might be. I wonder if I can get a drum roll on that one. Yeah, no sound effects today. That is Emily Dickinson. Yeah, you knew it was coming because I told you in the previous video, but I was kind of just seeing if you're paying attention. So let's pull it back up and get right to it. There you have it. Video 1, intro, 2 and 3, Edgar Allan Poe. Here we are, video number 4, Emily Dickinson. So remember, friends, we are not deviating from our course. Historical biographical approach, which means we're going to take a look at the life and times of Emily Dickinson. Why did she write it? Who was her audience? What was going on in her family, in her mind, in her neighborhood? What was her cat's name? Okay, fine. We don't really actually need to know her cat's name, but we're going to try to learn enough to make it enjoyable so that we learn a little bit more about who she was, and her poetry will definitely make more sense. So let's take a look at it. First of all, let's take a look at these dates. 1830 to 1886. What is the first thing that sticks out in your mind here? See, the first thing I think is, ooh, wow, she lived right through the American Civil War. And she was 30 years old when it started, so she clearly knew exactly what was going on. She was about 35 years old when it ended. And then, look at this. And then she basically lives another 20 years during what we call the Reconstruction period. Now, you also take note that I put that she was way up in the Northeast, Amherst, Massachusetts. So she was definitely far removed from all of the mess that was going on in the South during that time. But just take note, all right? She studied at the Amherst Academy, and she had a love, of course, as most poets do, of reading when she was growing up. She did attend a female seminary for a time. She didn't graduate from that seminary, but she had some biblical and theological training. Here's what I want you to know about Emily Dickinson. This is probably one of the most important things. She did not like being around people. Now, remember we talked about in previous videos, remember, especially when we read Jonathan Swift, do you guys remember the word I taught you for people who hate people? You remembered it, don't you? Misanthropic. Misanthropic. Now, I don't think Emily Dickinson was a misanthrope, but she could have. I don't know this. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I don't even play one on television, but she could have suffered from something like agoraphobia. You ever heard of agoraphobia? Yeah, the Greek word agora refers to the marketplace. That's what it means. But phobia means fear. So it's people who do not like being in large crowds. You know what? And I had a student many, many years ago who was agoraphobic, and he didn't even know he was agoraphobic at that time. And of course, nobody did. And I took him with a group of people to a concert. We were in a concert hall, and his name was Peter. I looked over at him, and he had perspiration just flowing down his face. His face was turning red, and he started shaking all over. That's when he found out that he was indeed agoraphobic. So being in that crowd caused him to have a reaction. It's a real thing. It's a physical thing. So back to Emily Dickinson. Was she agoraphobic? I don't know. It doesn't matter. But not only did she like to stay in her house, she liked to stay in her room. She didn't even like coming out of her bedroom. So that's kind of important. She never got married. Well, wow, that's a shocker. Somebody who doesn't even like coming out of their bedroom never gets married. And how did she communicate with human beings? Not leaning out the window, not screaming down the street. She primarily wrote letters, and that's really how she communicated with people. And you know what? Here's another thing that's interesting. Her poems were not published during her lifetime. Not all, I mean, only a handful, about 10 of her poems. She wrote, brace yourselves for this. She wrote about 1,800 poems. Only 10 of them were published while she was alive, and the rest were published after she died. How did that happen? Well, her sister Lavinia found her poems. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine just like, oh, okay, well, my sister passed away, so I better go through her things. And she finds 1,800 unpublished poems, and she made them public. And since that time, we have been reading Emily Dickinson poems. She died at the ripe young age of 56. Now, I know you guys watching this video and all of my students probably think that's old, don't you? Yeah, I don't really think that's old because I'm dangerously close to that age. But that's still, to me, that's young, especially to pass away. She had a kidney disease, so 1886. All right, now you got it. Time period, audience, Northeast. Remember, her audience, she wasn't really writing for an audience, was she? She wasn't really thinking, oh, I'm writing this poem because I want to get it published in this magazine, or I'm going to read it at this event. No, these are reflections. These are interior, internal. These are things that, at least in her mind, when she was writing them, she felt like she was writing them mainly just because she liked writing for herself. All right, back to the literary toolbox. Historical context, we got a little bit of that. Biographical context, we got a little bit of that. We'll deal with genre. We'll definitely be looking at some literary devices as we walk through her poems. And elements of the plot. I'm not really sure if I'd call what's going on in her poems a plot, but I just want to keep the literary toolbox right in, kind of in, front and center. So you always remember when you're approaching a new book, these are the things you want to deal with. So let me give you some tips for reading Emily Dickinson. What would someone, well, actually, let me do this. I'm gonna back up a little bit. What do you think somebody would write about who likes to just sit in their bedroom all day long and stay away from people? Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? Well, here are a few of the things that she'd like to write about. First of all, death. Okay, yeah, that's kind of morbid, literally. I guess, if you don't like being around people, I suppose you would have a lot of time to think about your own, the brevity of your own life, your own finiteness, immortality. What in the world's going to happen to me after I die? So she was really obsessed with that. But she also did appreciate art and nature, and you'll see that come out in some of her poetry. All right, what about the meter and rhyme schemes and so forth? She used something called common meter. I don't think this is, I don't think that we see a lot of poets doing this, but it's a little bit complicated. So let me see if I can break it down. So you have alternating lines of iambic tetrameter and iambic trimeter. Okay, remember, iambic means you double it. And then tetra means 4, tri means 3. So what would you have there? 4 times 2 is 8. So you would have a line with 8 syllables. Try 3 times 2 is 6. Then a line with 6 syllables. So 8, 6, 8, 6, 8, 6. This is a guess. All right, we don't know this for sure. Why would she have chosen this particular rhythm for her poems? Well, it's actually the basic rhythm and meter that's used in church hymns. So some Emily Dickinson scholars think she may have chosen this meter because maybe it gave her poetry, like this sense of reverence and this elevated and lofty sense. Don't know that for sure. Don't know that she ever said that, but you can decide, when you read it. As always, what have I told you over and over and over when you're reading poetry? Don't read it in your head. Don't just read it silently in your head. Read it out loud. And if you don't want to read it out loud, then go to YouTube and listen to somebody else read it. Poetry was meant to be performed, spoken, heard, experienced audibly, not just read in the secret quiet chambers of your demented mind. Okay, I'll take that back. All right, here you go. What poems are we going to read by Emily Dickinson? All right, I think I got 4 picked out here. I'm Nobody. Who are you? We're going to do that one in this video. Then we'll do the other 3 in the next video. I felt a funeral in my brain. That sounds like a weird one. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. And then we're going to end with a very popular Emily Dickinson poem. Hope is the thing with feathers. All right. I'm Nobody. Who are you? All right. This is a fairly short one. It's a little bit lighter. I mean, I think it does have some heavy themes that we could talk about, but it's not, I don't think this poem is meant to be taken super, super, super seriously. But let me just be quiet. Let's read it, and then we'll walk through it. Obviously, you can tell it's very short. I'm Nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell, they'd advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell one's name, to live long June to an admiring bog. There you have it. I'm Nobody. Who are you? What do you think she's talking about here? Is she being self-deprecating? Is she saying, woe is me, I'm a loser, I don't count? She may or may not have thought that about herself. I don't think that's what she's doing here. I think she is talking about anonymity. I think she's talking about what a joy it is, at least to her, to not be famous. What? What are you talking about, Mr. Eder? What do you mean? Doesn't everybody want to be famous? No, everybody doesn't want to be famous. They might even think they want to be famous. But what Emily Dickinson, I think, is saying here is that it seems to me, and listen, you can imagine someone like her who may or may not have been agoraphobic, who liked to just hide away from people in her bedroom. What a horrifying thing it would be to her if she were alive today and realized how famous she is. Maybe it's a good thing that her poems were not published during her lifetime, because I don't know if she could have handled it. She loves her anonymity. She loves the fact that nobody knows who she is. She has her privacy. She has her life, and she doesn't have to answer, to put on a smile, put on a face, or be anything to anybody. A few more comments on this poem, and then we're going to wrap this one up. This is one of her most well-known poems. You know, if you think of Emily Dickinson, this one usually comes up, you know, in her top 10. And it's, I think what she's also doing is appealing to an audience who would have said, yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah, I kind of like to just fly under the radar. Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying, Emily. Because she's putting herself out there and saying to the reader, hey, you're kind of like this? So am I. Now we are in this thing together. And she doesn't want the notoriety. I mean, imagine, you know, for her, it would, I mean, there's a little satire here, but I think that she's even taking a crack at public figures. I think she's even she's getting a little dig in, you know, and hey, look, this is in the 1800s. I mean, you know, it's not like Hollywood was not like it is today. You know, there's no social media. We live in a totally different world. But I think she's taking a little bit of a dig here and sort of pulling the rug out from underneath public figures and taking a shot at their dignity by comparing them to croaking frogs at the end of this poem. So there you have it. I'm nobody, who are you? All right, now let's get back. Make sure that we're wrapping up. I think we're in pretty good shape here, but let's just make sure. There we go. There's I'm nobody, who are you? Yeah, just wanted to make sure. So there you have it, video number 4, Emily Dickinson. Now we'll look at those other 3 poems. If you have a chance to read those, I would say definitely go ahead and read those other 3 poems. And I want you to formulate. I'm telling you less, okay? I'm putting less on the proverbial silver platter here for you and handing it to you. I've already taught you how to interpret, how to read, what to look for. I've taught you all about rhythm and meter and rhyme schemes. I want you to go ahead and look at those other 3 poems that we're going to be looking at in the next video. And I will see you then.